and welcome to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League. We are in part 2 of season 96-97, still in that long golden summer of 1996. Joined, as always, by my two good friends. Adam Thornton, how are you today?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, we were just talking off air about how you remember things differently to how they happened. I think this is going to be another example of it. So looking forward to getting stuck into it.
Absolutely is. David Edgar's here as well. David, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, guys. Yeah, lovely to be here. And absolutely, I mean, already the revelations of things that I have misremembered have been quite shocking to me. And it's wonderful to go back and actually realise that your mind does play tricks on you. That there's so many things that are part of, I think, collective received wisdom that we all seem to fall into by osmosis, particularly in football.
Yeah, my memories up front are that United strolled to this title very comfortably. Arsenal kind of picked up in preparation of next season. I'd forgotten it was very much in the mix until quite late, but we'll get into all that. This week's show will be bookended by two games between Newcastle and Manchester United, and the first one obviously being the Charity Shield, David, in August, of course, and the Sunday of the weekend where Oasis were at Nebworth, and probably the apotheosis, the peak, the absolute biggest point anyway of Britpop, and the hangover and that slow downturn was just about to come and seep into 1997. But this weekend, you are at the top of the mountain of that particular genre.
Absolutely. Being, super cool and an early adopter, I had stopped liking Oasis by this point because I had seen them in the Cat House in Glasgow in front of a couple of hundred people, and then 5 times in 1994. So as soon as they started playing Loch Lomond and things, and it's been so much fun the past year when people have been gatekeeping and saying to young kids, "Were you at Loch Lomond?" I'm like, "Yeah, come on." The real cool people had stopped going by then. But it was absolutely, at its peak at this point. You felt unstoppable if you were a teenager. I mean, you really did, and it's something that I hope that the younger people can get back again, because you felt part of something, and music almost reflected football. I don't know, because you felt, if you were into the indie music or a band, then you wore it. You literally did. You wore it like a football shirt, and it did seem that the charts were absolutely full of guitar bands, indie music. Some of it not very good, I have to say, with all due respect to Northern Uproar, etc. But if you had a bowl cut and 4 guitars, there was a fairly good chance you were getting a record deal. In terms of football, I think because all these years later that City have come to so much reflect Oasis, Chelsea for Blur, for example, as well, another strong identification, that there's this sense that Manchester United were sort of apart from it, Britpop, because they were, they've recently just released a Stone Roses inspired kit to commemorate the death of Manny, and Manchester was a few years before. But United were really cool at this point. People forget that. United was super cool at this point. They had, Beckham and Giggs, and they were very glam indeed at this point. And they had a sort of, you really felt they had taken Liverpool's position as only slightly disputed best team at the moment. You'd get a challenge here and there, but generally speaking, I think the biggest compliment you can say, or the biggest invocation of their status, was whoever finishes above them will win the title.
Which is what Alan Shearer would say at the end of the show, and we'll pick that up later. Adam, very briefly on the game itself, Manchester United cruise, and I mean cruise to victory, 4-0 at Wembley. Shearer talks about just being absolutely embarrassed and obviously not good enough, blah, blah, blah. This is a big moment for him, of course, the first feature in his hometown shirt. 2 up at half-time, 4-0 in the end. All 4 goals are are actually very, very enjoyable goals. The second and third, I just want to point out, Cantona just backheels the ball, almost not looking, into Beckham's path, who fizzes one. I mean, this incredible direct cross onto the head of Nicky Butt and a diving header, which looks brilliant anyway. That's sensational. Beckham run through and go, and he lobs the Newcastle goalkeeper as well for the third. It really is just picking up where they left off a wee bit, and Newcastle and Keegan have an issue with this team.
Totally do. Just on Beckham, I know it's a bit of a cliche to say it was a really good crosser of the ball, but I think it's one of those ones that we speak about a lot, where you can say it a lot and probably still be underrated, because it's just incredible the variation that he had on them. This that you mentioned, whipped ones in, longer arching ones. He was sensational at it, and I think not your sort of average winger. He is more of that sort of wide midfielder, I would suggest, who can cross. So again, you're starting to see this divergence from, you stand in this area of the pitch, you should do X. So I think this is a good tent pole for that, if you like, as well. But yeah, I think the game overall, it looks relatively as you would expect, I guess, and maybe it sort of signifies, maybe that's why in your heads you thought this was
United
a
monstered them, yeah,
because this game is the set off, and it's your initial set for the season.
Can I just dive in on that point, Adam?
Yeah, sure.
My recollections, Martyn, I'd be really interested to hear your take on this. My recollections are United duffed them up in the Charity Shield. Newcastle then gubbed them famously later in the season, and that's like a watershed for United. And then I just thought that they battered through. Martyn, is that far from your opinion?
Kind of, and we will get to this notion that Ferguson now prioritising Europe, the league will take care of the league in the winter. Be in the mix, and we'll be all right. Plenty to come. We did last season a kind of famous match of the day talking point, I suppose, with Alan Hansen. This match of the day, my word, was packed full. You could do a whole show on this Saturday. In fact, back deep in the Nest and Dorma archives, you can find exactly that. We very conscious of time for this episode, so we'll try our best. But this is quite the opening day of Barclays action, gentlemen. Davey, I'll start with you. Riverside Stadium, Middlesbrough, newly promoted Middlesbrough with, in fact, not newly promoted at all, but they've been promoted recently. The upcoming team against Liverpool, who, showing signs of resurgence in a quite bogging cream away.
Yes,
it should be said. Ravanelli, Emerson, etc. All on display in quite an incredible 3-3. Ravanelli hat-trick, Fowler's there, Barnes is there, it's all go, and well, this is it, isn't it? This is what Sky, this is what everybody's after, this kind of entertainment every weekend.
In terms of, as I say, that received wisdom, I was convinced Middlesbrough had just been promoted, and they hadn't. You're absolutely right. I thought Middlesbrough were straight up and they made these signings. Nope, not at all. Look, this game, you could write a book on it, couldn't you? I mean, it was back and forth. It was non-stop, two teams going at, and it seemed very indicative of the culture at the time, which was attack, attack, attack. Look at who we're buying. Look at the players that are coming in. In terms of preset narratives that you have in your head, Ravanelli's going to take this league by storm. That I just believed, because look at him. And then he gets a hat-trick in his opening day against Liverpool. But then Liverpool, again, this is maybe why they won't win the league. They're involved in that was my take on the opening day, because, look, brilliant performance by Middlesbrough. Liverpool stood up to it, but they didn't win. They conceded 3. They are flaky at the back. They don't have the same level at the back that they have up front. We know they've got super attacking players. We know that they are, a team that are capable of scoring lots of goals. again, it's funny because everybody talks about the cream suits and nobody talks about the cream strips. You would have thought that would have been a tactical mistake. I think it was Reebok, wasn't it? Was it a Reebok kit?
Yeah, that's Bolton. You know what I mean? That's not Liverpool. That's not.
I do strongly identify Bolton with Reebok, the stadium.
Just a note on the cosmopolitan nature of this opening weekend. The first weekend of the Premier League, this might be out on a couple of numbers, but bear with me. In terms of players born outside the UK and Ireland, on the opening weekend of the Premier League 92, there were 10 players in all of those matches. On this opening weekend, which obviously 4 years later, there are 34. 4 years later in 2000, anyone want to guess on how many players started that particular weekend's fixtures that were not born on these shores?
Is it in three figures?
120?
No, it's not as big. 75. So it's clearly moving in step. Chelsea have a huge part, and Arsenal did a huge part to play in that as we get on. But it was a clear part of that opening weekend. This is glamour. Sky, for the first time around the start of this season, I think they've always blown their own trumpet about the Premier League. That's what they do. But I think this is Richard Keys for the first time saying this is the best league in the world. Now, it is nowhere near the best league in the world, but market it and it will come. You can create something into existence, and that's ultimately what they did. But again, post that Euro 96 glow and all of these players from Serie A, champions of Europe, and all of that coming here to play for Middlesbrough and Chelsea, respectively, then, there is that sense of we're going somewhere. Adam, can we go to Selhurst Park? And United very much picking up where they left off. Cantona picking up where he left off, just driving a shot low into the goal. Dennis Irwin added another very comfortable day for Manchester United at Selhurst Park and playing the ball out of defence with a few minutes to go. In fact, I think we might be in injury time. And David Beckham decides Neil Sullivan's a bit off his line. I'm going to have a crack at this just before the ball reaches the halfway line. So technically in the United half. And this was, for all the stuff that we'll touch on this opening day, this is the story of it. Someone has arrived.
For sure. Yeah, I think this is one of my early core memories of the Premier League. For that to happen, I think what was the first time I had seen it. I'm sure there will be earlier ones that you remember. Certainly the first time I've seen it, we speak about how everywhere the Premier League was, and you're seeing it in multiple different iterations across news, match of the day, everything. It was one of the first viral moments, I think, if there was even a thing like viral moments at that point. The audacity of it, I think, is incredible. Yes, it's 2-0 up. Yes, it's against Wimbledon, but it's just incredible. I think it's one of those moments that, like you said, someone has arrived, and I think it sums up David's point. Man United are cool at this point, and they're in vogue, and it now looks like they're absolutely unstoppable because they've got this batch of young kids coming through, and they're supplementing with really sensible signings, and they're looking like they are going to go and steamroll the league as far as I'm concerned. And when something like that happens as well, it's a bit of a cherry on the cake. So everything looked like it was coming up United at the end of that game for sure.
A couple of things, Adam, before we move on. The context to that goal and me being wow about it was that I'd grown up with my dad saying Pelé nearly scored from the halfway line.
Yeah.
Can you imagine someone even trying that? And he was so close, but being close enough was good enough to be, this is the greatest player in the world, to even try something from that at a World Cup. So for someone to do that, not a great week for Neil Sullivan because he was done off his line when Newcastle played them in the midweek.
Right,
The second thing, this isn't for this week's show, but just to plant a seed, because I want to ask you later on. Beckham will be Young Player of the Year, and he'll play quite a lot of it in the middle. He plays both games against Liverpool in the middle of the park, both Arsenal games, I think, in the middle of the park. Hasn't quite moved out. Now, a lot of that's just necessity, Keenan, but not always fit and available. He hasn't quite moved out, isn't yet wearing number 7 either, number 10 at this season. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on him as a central midfielder and whether there was an opportunity maybe missed there for the future of his career. But yeah, I think you maybe mentioned why it was just a necessity to move him out there because the strength of his crossing was just absolutely exceptional. Another hat-trick hero was at Nottingham Forest, David. Kevin Campbell still kicking a ball, still referenced in this show. Nottingham Forest with a very good season, good couple of seasons, actually. And he's continuing. It's not going to end like that, I'm afraid. But a very convincing, dominant British centre forward performance in their 3-0 win at Coventry.
As a Rangers supporting person with a fondness for Everton, Walter Smith and Kevin Campbell are two of my all-time favourite people. I loved Kevin Campbell, Martyn. It will not surprise you knowing the type of centre forward that I am fond of, which is a big battering ram type who can play, who can score goals, but who can single-handedly go out there and absolutely ragdoll a back four. And these were some tough back fours back then, and they generally were back fours. You got the odd 3 at the back, which I hate mentioning because I know it brings Adam out in hives if you mention 3-5-2 to him. But Kevin Campbell was a terrific striker who really, in my opinion, didn't get his due until he goes to Everton. And do you remember the year, Martyn, we'll cover it on here, where he pretty much single-handedly keeps him up when he arrives late in the season on loan. And, I mean, just as magnificent. He was a proper footballer, sadly no longer with us, died tragically young. And he was a wonderful, wonderful football player because, yes, he was your traditional British centre forward. He was good in the air, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yes, he was physical. You had to be. You either had to be exceptionally skillful or you had to be physical. You had to be able to cope and go up and have a battle against centre-backs, which he could do. He was quick. People don't, I think, quite get that because he was very, very quick over that like 3-4 yards, that burst. And he was one of the best I've seen actually at getting to the front post, which is an art. It's a skill to regularly be there first ahead of your defender. He was so good at that, at making that near post run and getting on the end of things, whether it be for a finish or a flick to the back post. And he always struck me, Martyn, as the type of player that another forward in a 4-4-2 or a 3-5-2 would adore playing next to. Don Hutchison speaks about it. He would play off him quite a lot and said it was absolutely brilliant because when he saw the centre-back with the ball, he said, I just got moving because 8 times out of 10 he's going to get the flick on and he's going to put it where I need it to be. Terrific player and a real sad loss that Kevin Campbell, because he was only 54 when he passed, and it was a real shame. But we'll come to it. He's one of the reasons that Everton have this unbroken Premier League history because they were very close to going down that year. But at Forest, started really well. And then just sort of that whole side will lose its way over this season.
Yeah, unsustainable. Should give props to Sheffield Wednesday. They beat Aston Villa on the opening day and won their first 3 games. Go to Newcastle indeed and win. The only team to win those first 3 games. And Richie Humphries, my goodness, with an absolute blaster. That ball. I'm sure Sky recorded it because they were very much into their gizmos now as being the hardest shot ever taken. It might be in the 90s or something like that. I mean, it is blasted into the net. So props to Richie Humphries. Adam,
if you're listening, Richie.
I'm sure he is. Adam, I'll come to you in a minute about Newcastle's start because it's a disappointing one. Quickly, David, Spurs go to Blackburn and they win. But Gary Mabbutt, bless him, is it innocuous? It's not an innocuous tackle. It's a bad tackle. I'm not entirely sure it's the worst. It's one of those where he's following through in the art of humping the ball up the pitch. But he tries to launch one, and the Blackburn player comes through. The legs kind of raised. He breaks his legs. I think his leg absolutely shatters. Out for the rest of the season. I think he comes back a little in 97, 98, but that's when he retires. He's a kind of unlucky Alf character, David. Really, a very gifted player. But there's just always, he's battling against something. Obviously, he struggled with diabetes all his life. But injury, because he's fractured face at one point, cheekbone, I think, skull. He scores an OG in an FA Cup final that Spurs really should win and don't. There's really that kind of light and shade with Mabbutt. Always found it quite sad because he was a very good player. Brilliant guy by just about every account there's ever been. But this is very much the end of his playing career for all intents and purposes here on the first day.
Yeah, real shit. I mean, always horrible when you see somebody pick up a serious injury, but when it's somebody who's picked up serious injuries in the past, you really do feel for them. I think there's a lot of parallels, Martyn, with Luke Shaw, with Gary Mabbutt. In terms of clearly a very gifted player at a big club for a number of seasons, maybe doesn't win as much as you might have, because people, that Spurs side he was a big part of in the late 80s was a very, very good side indeed, was very capable side, and could and probably should have won more than it did. Look, for him to have the career he had in those days of sports science, I think, given that he was diabetic, I think it's remarkable, and he deserves nothing but credit for that. I think that he almost had to self-manage his condition, Martyn. He didn't, get a lot. Nowadays, it's different, but back then, there wasn't really anywhere near the amount of. In fact, there wasn't. I can definitively say that. The injury he got from that John Fashanu incident was awful and an absolute disgrace. The stuff that Fashanu was doing at that time, which I think these days, I'm not saying this lightly, I think if a player did that, they would face criminal charges because he's trying to hurt them and he succeeds.
And it's just a joke now, right? It's or looking back, that's just how it was. The crazy gang, blah blah blah.
Crazy guy, yeah. I hate that. It's one of the things I hate about Fashanu is that he was a thug and he did try to hurt people and he succeeded. And I really don't like that deification of that Wimbledon side, because to me there is a line, and it's quite a thick line. It's not, I think, one that's hard to spot between we are a physical side and we actively wish to take people and put them in hospital. And I think they cross that far too often. This one, though, you kind of knew with his age, his injury record, that would be it. And it is a real shame. And if you've heard him, be interviewed over the years, Martyn, he's a very intelligent guy. He's a very clever guy. And I don't think that he deserved to go out in this way. Tottenham fans, though, they'll do very much, he's a club legend there. Deservedly so, because he was there a long time. But like I say, I see parallels, someone that Luke Shaw, that if they get a bad tackle, it's not that inch off where it's painful but not serious. It was always a serious one, and it was a huge blow for Tottenham because you're losing a guy who not only is a very good football player, but he's your on-pitch leader. He's the guy they look to in times of strife, and as you say, he has a brief comeback the following year, but it's never likely.
Okay, take a quick break. We'll be back to talk all things Newcastle as well as some of the other front runners in this season. Welcome back. Loads going on in the opening day of the Premier League 96-97. Adam, all the hype was around Newcastle, fallen just short the year before, but have bought the best player in the world for the most money anyone has ever spent in the world. And all eyes were on them. Humbled in the Charity Shield and humbled at Goodison Park as well. They lost there. They would lose at home to Sheffield Wednesday in their third game. not the ideal start, but they do get on a roll. We'll talk about their game in October against Manchester United at the end of the show, but there are a good run of wins eventually, Adam, and I think in all of those wins, that's what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The names Shearer and or Ferdinand appear in all of them. Some might say they couldn't work together too similar, but they very much were.
Yeah, I don't think I subscribe to that theory because I don't think either of them are really the out and out types of players that you might think they are. So I don't think that wasn't a big concern for me. I think the argument, I guess, as we touched on last episode, sorry, was firepower wasn't really an issue. It was further back. It's a very Newcastle run of fixtures, these, right up until that exact point that we'll end the show on. The 2 defeats, three defeats really, if you include the Charity Shield as well, burst that Shearer bubble a little bit. And it's okay. He's not going to be the saviour that gives us even more goals than we had, that will negate what we have at the back end. Can he be? Who knows? It's too early to say. So, yeah, I think the fact that they then go and turn on that momentum and that 7-match league winning streak takes them to the top of the table, as we'll come to, is quite interesting because it then does start to come to that. But I think, as we've seen last year, it's built on flimsy foundations, I think, in terms of mentality, in terms of the defence, in terms of the manager. So it is all about, can we score more than you? Of course, there's another 4-3 in this run as well, because of course there has to be. It's obligatory. So yeah, it is an entirely Newcastle opening 10 fixtures, I think, and what comes after that we'll obviously go on about as well is also entirely Newcastle in its own special way. So yeah, at the time, you get caught up in it, of course you do. And I remember thinking, yeah, maybe they did just need another player to score goals. Maybe that would see them through. He is the best player, the best English player in the league. England's main man, all that sort of jazz off the back of a great season. It wouldn't be outlandish to suggest that Alan Shearer could be the, again, to use that phrase, cherry on top of the cake to turbocharge a league title, even if you have all those deficiencies. And I didn't really see much in that run to suggest otherwise.
I'll stick with you because Arsenal make a good start, decent start to the season. At the end of September, they're only 3 points off the top of the table, and they have 2 interim caretaker managers, call them what you want. We talked about Bruce Rioch's sudden departure on the eve of the season. So Stuart Houston's in for a wee bit, Pat Rice as well, before Arsène Wenger turns up at the end of September, beginning of October. Interested in the reaction, both of you, really, to this appointment. Some of it is inconceivable now. You just wouldn't not know who he was. I mean, everyone would know who Arsène Wenger was just because of the information that we have readily available, and the kind of Arsène who in the press and indeed his contemporaries. We'll get to Alex Ferguson's appreciation of his CV a little later in the series, but he'd come from, in his words, Japan, which was a big deal, apparently. I guess if he had been Japanese, not a world football power, I can kind of understand the reticence. If he had just had all of his time in Japan, I can understand is he really kind of cut out for the Premier League? He managed the team in the Champions League semi-final 2 years before he arrived, and
no
was
Wikipedia,
beaten by,
though. No Wikipedia.
It's 2 years. I mean, beaten by the greatest club side of all time, arguably, certainly by that time. This seems so bizarre. Again, we're just so used to knowing everything, Adam, I guess.
It's the insularity piece. Again, that was tongue-in-cheek, no Wikipedia, but you would imagine some of the footballers of that time, and maybe even now, we see it ourselves. You're linked with someone, and the first thing you do is go on Wikipedia and say, where has he been? And you can see his entire career at that point. So maybe if that had happened, understand it to an extent. For footballers, journalists, I find baffling that it's where has this guy came from, and such a big focus on Japan rather than where he went to, or what he did with Monaco. I think the Tony Adams line that everyone has heard sums it up best, where it was, what was he said? At first I thought, what does this Frenchman know about football? He wears glasses, looks like a school teacher. He's not going to be as good as George Graham. Does he even speak English properly? It's mad. David said something earlier on about criminal charges being for a tackle. I cannot imagine this in the modern game either. A player coming out and saying that, to be so cutthroat about it. Yeah, but that being said, my reaction was probably the same. Again, as a fan, you're thinking, okay, I wasn't maybe someone who necessarily thought that Arsenal were a dominant force at this point, or likely to be a dominant force, given how George Graham had ended and that sort of transition. But it's still a shock to me. They're still one of the big clubs in the league, and it's a shock someone coming from that type of league. So maybe it's just the insularity and the naivety of its time for that one. But yeah, certainly sold newspaper columns, definitely, for sure.
No, it did. Davey, again, it should just be pointed out, we'll get into the Wenger revolution and the things he did differently in the team, the aesthetic that he created, especially next season. But they're not struggling at the bottom of the table. They're not a club, even though they've been battered around by scandal and everything else. You know, they've won a European final, recent memory, been in a final of one, a semi-final of another. They're all right. And, you know, you get Bergkamp now settling in. Patrick Vieira has a kind of force in the middle of the park. They've got the best defence in the country. You know, Ian Wright has rediscovered some kind of mojo. You know what I mean? He's picking up something to work with, and he's not completely ripping up or starting afresh from a team that's languishing in the relegation places. This has been a decent start to the season.
And looking back, you know, what manager in the world wouldn't want to go in and inherit that squad? I think culturally, the Japanese league, which still doesn't get a lot of respect over here today, despite the amount of superb Japanese players that are kicking about in Europe. But back then, it was far worse. It was like, really, there has to be a reason he's gone there, basically.
Yeah.
Then there was, you know, I think you're at the height of Little England or tabloid. I mean, you remember the headlines for the England-Germany match.
For you, Fritz, Zavora's over.
Yeah, exactly. So they also had a very, and I think you still see it with journalists of that era who are still kicking about or that grew up in that era, that they still have a very high opinion of their opinions. And here was somebody that wasn't part of that clique, of that managerial group. But I think that there's something deeper, and that is that Arsenal were not cosmopolitan, which sounds really odd now because they very much, Wenger will make them so. They were not. Arsenal were a very English football club at this point. I think that Peter Hillwood once described them as the Bank of England. And that sort of was the
English football club, I think. Liverpool would certainly see themselves as different. Manchester United would pull upon that kind of Irish
Mancunia.
Roots. Yeah, that's the establishment club of England for sure.
I agree, and at this point very much so. You know, and for them to be going so far out of what most people, and Adam's right, we all did, you know, it's easy for us to sit back and say, you know, I was a world soccer reader, I'd heard of him, but I couldn't believe Arsenal were hiring him. I thought that was just insane of all the options that they were going for. I think my mind was more open. I think if they'd brought in at the time Arrigo Sacchi, for example, I think I would have went, oh, right, I get that. I don't think I was totally a foreign person cannot do this. But I did think, how has this guy landed this job? Because to me, Arsenal were this grand, as you say, very English club, and this didn't fit it at all. This seemed Chelsea-ish. This seemed Chelsea kind of manoeuvre. It didn't seem an Arsenal one. And I didn't get the fit at all. And then again, and this does play a part in it, right? I know that we've got our opinions on why certain managers get more opportunities than others. He looked weird. He did. He was professorial and he was softly spoken and he had the rimmed, the eyeglasses. And he did. He looked to me like a philosophy professor at a university. He didn't look like a football manager. And then, though, you sort of, as Adam says, you look now at what he'd done at Monaco, who he'd worked with, who was giving him a Glenn Hoddle, Mark Haitley at the time are interviewed by the English press, and both of them say, "Oh, aye, this bloke, don't you worry about this guy. He's going to be superb." But it's still a trope. I think we see at times more when newspapers think they can get away with it, but the funny foreigner trope. And then there is something very much in British football that we absolutely hate, which is someone who's not from here coming into our league and saying you don't do things perfectly. Even though we can say that, and we might have complaints, we hate it when someone from outside comes in and points out things that we actually know to be true. And that's what Wenger was up against. I think it's a remarkable testament to both his success, his talent, and his determination that within about 3 years, everybody's saying, can you tell us more? Can you educate us more? That shows you the impact that he will have. But yeah, at the time, the famous Arsène Who headline, and it wasn't, as I say, it wasn't just, the players or whatever. I think there was a general sense of, here has this grand old English club, and it's gone a bit mad. It's gone a bit rogue. It's done something that does not fit the spec whatsoever.
I think it's, even if you look underneath the well, he didn't come from, he hasn't always been in Japan. He was at Monaco and blah blah. But you could still be forgiven for thinking that decision to go to Japan is a bit weird, as well. And just
it's not a standard career trajectory, right?
Yeah, but just to give a little bit of background on it, obviously he was in France with Monaco, pretty disillusioned as we were as Rangers fans with the French scandals in terms of corruption and Marseille and Bernard Tapie and all that sort of stuff. He did lose his job with Monaco, really poor start to the season, and he got sacked. And I think it was round about that point where he says himself a little bit disillusioned with the high stakes European game. By that, I mean not being, he's a very principled man. Didn't want to change formation for 10 years. Never mind take a bung. So I think there's that aspect of it as well. He also, I found out when I was doing some of the analysis here, he also thought that Japan was up and coming in terms of a region. They'd had Zico, they'd had Dunga. They were that sort of precursor, I guess, to maybe what we see with Saudi now, in that sense. A chance to go and have a new culture, do all that sort of stuff. And he had met at a FIFA conference, he'd met Toyota representatives who were also involved with Grampus as well. So there was all these sort of storylines, if you like. And then when he gets sacked, they were really impressed with him. They come and give him the opportunity, or they ask the question, probably thinking they'll say absolutely no chance. And maybe it's just one of those times that in someone's life where they're disillusioned and they need a bit of a change. And I would imagine in 1994, what is any more different to the south of France than Tokyo, or Japan, sorry. So I can sort of see it on a lot of levels, maybe not so on the football level, but if you're that disillusioned and pissed off with the way you think modern football is going, then it's almost like a gap year, isn't it? 18 months of I'm away to find myself.
He said that he was interested in Japanese culture. He wanted to learn more about the country. We don't, and we still don't take lifestyle into account when people make decisions, and it's absolutely bizarre. It's because we see these people as little two-dimensional characters that we see on our TV screens or occasionally live at a match, and we don't think of them as humans, and we never ever take into account that people, maybe at best we might go, oh, he wants to live in London, or he wants to live in Paris, but we generally base it entirely on football. Because they're not our decisions, we don't have to live with the consequences of these decisions. And I think that Wenger kind of is a bit of a mold breaker in this, that he said, I've always been interested in Japanese culture, and I thought it was a brilliant opportunity to go over there and learn about it. And to us, that was eccentric at that point. We did, because it did not compute that someone would do this. And I think that, Tony Adams said an interesting thing. Tony Adams at this point is facing up to his alcoholism. And he said, my head is, and I can empathise this, my head is up my arse at this point as it gets when you choose to quit drinking. And he said Wenger was just so good with him. But he said a really interesting thing, Tony Adams, in his autobiography, that he said, I also don't think that you can underestimate how clumsy that Arsène Wenger is. He said he's physically one of the most clumsy human beings I've ever met, and he said, and that really endeared him to the lads. He said he said that we didn't see him as this untouchable professor, because he would be walking along and he would bump into something or fall over, and he'd get up and he'd laugh and he'd say, "See, lads, that's why you're the player and I'm the coach." And he really began to win them over through his personality, because they rated his knowledge. But his personality was such that he was able to bring them on board pretty quickly. And I just think that Wenger is a mold breaker, because he doesn't fit our traditional boxes of what a British manager is, or a European manager. I don't think he does either. I think that he's got a hinterland, and not everyone in football, not everyone in life does. And I think that he was somebody who was engaging and fresh and genuinely different when he arrived at Arsenal. And genuinely, I think that Arsenal fans, after that initial scepticism, because you want a big name, don't you? You want, we all do. We want that glamour of the big name who you hope almost guarantees success. And instead, he came. I remember, though, the thing that really swung me on him, Martyn, was they had an interview on a very nascent Sky channel. I don't know if it was Sky Sports News at this point, but certainly.
But
one of the Sky
Sports
channels,
1, 2, and 3 by this point.
Right,
This was a big explosion. On
one of the evening shows, they had a French journalist on who explained that Arsène isn't actually because there was a joke, Arsène, Arsenal, there was a joke about that, and so he was asked about it, and he said, well, the interesting thing is that Arsène isn't actually a usual French name. It's the name of a detective in a series of French detective books, and it's a made-up name. He said it's the equivalent, really, of someone being called Sherlock and getting the Manchester United job. And I thought, that's great. I want this guy to succeed. I want Sherlock Wenger to succeed. And I don't think I've ever been as happy about a name of a football manager up until I heard that Jurgen Klopp's middle name was Norbert.
Yeah, Norbert's an absolute favourite. Your point about Tony Adams is a nice resonance, David. Again, moving towards more professionalism as Wenger's obviously going to herald, and away from that mid-90s culture that we've spoken about a lot. At its peak at Nebworth on that weekend and those years, and Adams really, after Euro 96, saying, I can't do this. Cannot live like this anymore. I'm an alcoholic, and facing up to that. It's very interesting. And Sky's use of Born Slippy by Underworld to tell that story in the Premiership years was, I thought, very nuanced and subtle. But anyway, let's take a break there, and we'll touch on Liverpool and Manchester United.
I didn't know that. Fucking hell. I didn't know that. I bet you they were sitting there, lads. Will we go with Born Slippy? Will we go with Chumbawamba?
Unreal. Welcome back to And It's Live, the history of the Premier League, and we are closing up part 2 of 96-97. Adam, at the end of September, Liverpool are top of the league, 8 games played, no defeats, 2 draws, and if my maths is right, 6 wins. A lot of goals in there, and not many by Mr. Robbie Fowler. Collingwood's chipping in, McManaman is chipping in, and so too is their very impossibly handsome and very good signing Patrick Berger, especially in a 5-1 win over Chelsea themselves, starting brightly, and some notable results there as well. What did Berger bring to that particular Liverpool team that they didn't have?
I think quite a lot. As I mentioned last season, very unenthused with their creativity, and I think all of a sudden he gives you McManaman things on the opposite flank. I think not at this stage, but I think certainly one of the big draws for Manchester United was the threat on both flanks from Giggs and Beckham. Now, Giggs and Berger are different types of players. McManaman and Beckham are similar-ish, but maybe one is about delivery and one is about different types of creativity. But balance, I guess, would be what I would suggest that Patrick Berger came. He lovely left foot, all those cliches that you wanna throw at it. Yeah, I would say he gives balance. He was a player that I like we spoke about. I liked. Poborski felt like Poborski got the headlines for the goal and the hair and all that sort of stuff. But it is one of those things, actually. Who's the better player? Well, it's the guy that Liverpool got, in my opinion. And I don't think that really stands up to much scrutiny when you look at the when you look at their careers at those clubs. So yeah. I think he brings balance. I think he was a lovely player. He was taller than I thought a kind of cultured midfielder should be at that point as well. I think he must have been 6'1", 6'2". You're used to sort of diminutive players now, playing between the lines. Maybe not now, but certainly 2000s, 2010s. So he was a bit of a outlier, I think, and he was not only what Liverpool needed, but just what they needed, certainly on that left-hand side, to bring that little bit of balance and another threat and stop me forcing me watching fullbacks trying to attack as we did the season before. So yeah, I think he was a really, really good player and a very shrewd signing for them that summer.
Yeah. Manchester United hadn't started superbly, and that win over Wimbledon followed by 3 draws, 2 of which are home to Everton and Blackburn Rovers. I mean, not absolutely top quality. Everton could be difficult. Derby County away, a draw. 2 big wins against Leeds and Forest, another draw, and then a win over Spurs. Solskjaer turning up with a couple of goals. Obviously get used to hearing that. And then the 2 met in October. I think Liverpool slightly unlucky on the day, David, at Old Trafford, but it's David Beckham again from the middle of the pitch who scores the only goal to get United seemingly back on track.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Ferguson spoke about this over the years about why do we start badly, and after he finished, he said, I racked my brains about it, and he said, and I think it was basically an almost inherent need to keep something back in the legs for the business side. Not conscious, they weren't speaking about it, but just a sense of this is not, we can't go hell for leather right now. And as you said, Martyn, earlier, we maybe simplified it as supporters to say, oh, they concentrate on Europe just now, and then, when Europe goes away. I don't think it was as nakedly straightforward as that, but I do think that teams who expect to be in a title race and who have won previously and know what it's like to go over the line, I think they do that. I mean, we used to see that up the road here, didn't we, with our own side, that they would start slowly, and that would be generally given as the reason. Well, titles are won later in the season. It's an interesting Adam's take on this. I'd really like to hear Adam's take on this. That we do this, don't we, with young players who come through and they play wide. We all, when are they going to move into the middle? I mean, generally, it's, I don't know if it's intellectually more respectable to play there, but young fullback comes along. When's he going to be a centre half? Young wide player, particularly a wide midfielder as opposed to a winger. We say, oh great, when's he going into centre midfield? It's almost like those are the blue ribbon positions, and I subscribe to that as well with Beckham. I'm like, right, I know they sometimes play him on the right, but clearly he's going to be a quarterback passing midfielder eventually. He's going to go in there and maybe become the type of player that Paul Scholes is, or we remember he would do that role for United. I think post Beckham Industries, and we're living in a world we've had 30 years of that, it is difficult to remember just how exciting and loved this cherubic, handsome midfielder in his, with his curtains, and this is before the haircuts. He's got the same curtains that I had, that I'm sure you had, Martyn, that were de rigueur at that point. He's in his enormous Manchester United shirt. This one might set the record. I'm as we go through each season, I'm looking for the most ship sail shirt, and this United Umbro effort is up there. And he was genuinely liked by fans, even some of the ABU crowd. As bizarre as that seems, given the type of player he'll be, or the type of icon he'll become. But when he burst through, people really liked David Beckham. I remember thinking, oh, what a good player, because he was stylish and in the way he played, I mean. And he was capable of doing things like he did on this day, which would pop up with a goal. But yeah, I mean, again, it was this, he's dicking about in the wing just now, but eventually he'll go into the middle, and that's when he'll become a real player. And I do think we do it, and weirdly, we still do.
I think everything's about timing, I guess. It only takes one thing to happen for people to open their minds a little bit and say, oh, actually, can that work? Beckham's arrival was just complete perfect timing. We spoke there about, I'll try and get it right this week, Cool Britannia. And it is a moment in time. Something happens and you think, that sums up the Premier League. It was canting off for a couple of years, and someone just arrives. It's like music as well. How often have we spoke, David, about a music scene? You can have a really good album, but it wasn't really part of a scene, or didn't really have a competing artist or a contemporary artist or whatever, and then a scene appears and there's two or three people doing the same things, and you're like, it means more. It's more of a powerful thing. And I think that's the case with footballers. These guys coming through, these young guys coming through, are all very, very good footballers, but you still need the face. You still need the rock star there to pull it all together.
He's the singer, aye. Yeah, he's a Michael Hutchins. Yeah,
aye, because stereotypical, another good-looking footballer now, or even 5-10 years later, he's really good and he's on the catwalks and stuff, but he's not that great. He's only there for his face. Well, Beckham was both and more there. So I think that part of it makes sense to me. In terms of the roles thing, I think that's just an evolution thing. I think pre 94, shall we say, there was 4 outfield roles. There was a defender. We're not really balling about you being a fullback. You're a defender. You're a midfielder. You're a winger, and then you're a striker. So it's just that evolution. That's why I was so excited when Guardiola and fullbacks came around, because fullbacks got a lot of love from 2007-ish onwards, and almost defined that role. Because to your point, it was, you're a centre half, but we'll stick you at fullback for the first few years until you learn the trade, and then if you're good enough,
yes.
You're in the middle.
That's exactly it.
Evolution thing, yeah.
Gary Stevens is tutting as we speak.
Exceptions to rules.
Indeed. We're going to finish with a match on the 20th of October, but I'll just give you a little précis of where we are before that 10th match day of the Premier League season. Top 6, Chelsea are in 6th place with 16 points. Wimbledon are in 5th place with 18. And Wimbledon, the last season has been a genuine crackerjack, difficult to guess type team, a real spoiler. They're up there. Manchester United in 4th with 19, Liverpool and Arsenal with 20, and Kevin Keegan's Newcastle on top of the league in 21. And of course, it's Newcastle who play Manchester United Super Sunday on that weekend. And hotly anticipated, the story of the season before, Charity Shield would suggest it's going to be more of the same. The scoreline's similar, but it's very much on the other foot. Darren Peacock, the unlikely source of the opening goal, a scrappy goal. United didn't play badly, probably should have had a penalty. Should have had a penalty. David Ginola scores a fantastic goal to just get that bit of daylight before half-time. And then Ferdinand, Shearer has to score, of course, at this particular moment in time. And maybe the most famous goal of the game, yes. Philippe Albert just rampaging down. He said, you know what? Peter Schmeichel hates this more than anything in life, and that's been chipped. And he does it beautifully. And it's 5-0, and it's a huge statement, and it's like, right, we have got something on our hands here. Maybe Newcastle can do it. They have the best striker in the world, blah, 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 blah. But they've done it. They have beaten this team. They haven't scraped past. It wasn't a 5-0, if you know what I mean. But, ultimately, that's what the scoreline reads. This is huge psychologically, and we're going to get... And Arsenal and Liverpool are in the mix here. This is really going to be a season. Talk about the aftermath in the coming weeks. But David, that particular Sunday, that is a sit-up and notice result.
To go back to the theme of things that are in your mind, Kevin Keegan explodes at the end of the previous season, and that's it. Newcastle are never the same again. Well, in hindsight, yeah, probably, but at the time, this game, oh no, the sands are shifting, the tectonic plates are moving, and Newcastle are... Yep, that even from the start of the season, how many times was that? Look at the progress they got, duffed up something chronic in the Charity Shield, and now look at them 5-0. You think Philippe Albert, you think two things, a moustache and this chip. And it's a shame that his whole career boils down to his facial furniture and this goal, but they are the first things that you remember. He was, like a big Danish potato. He was susceptible to being chipped, was Schmeichel. Schuker, the famous one. But I can think of, actually, off the top of my head, I can think of 4 or 5 others. There's a weakness in his game. Hell of a finish, right enough, though, isn't it? I mean, how he gets the ball to move like that, incredible. But, there was a sense of kind of mania in the stadium, wasn't there, in that second half as the goals start to rain in? I don't think anyone... Certainly, I watched it in a pub in Glasgow because going out on a Sunday to watch the EPL was becoming a thing. We tended still to be playing on Saturday. There was no live TV deal in Scotland at this point. It'd be the following season, 97-98. Before there was weekly live television matches in Scotland, they were fairly irregular at this point. And it was becoming a social thing for people of my age that you went to the pub on a Sunday and watched the big English game. And I remember very, very vividly the sense of shock. Manchester United just did not get turned over like this in a big game. They just did not. And they felt rampant in the second half, Newcastle. Because you're right, it's a very close game for about an hour. And then it's not. And it's very quick. Shearer with the goal at the back post, just typical poacher's finish. And he's absolutely delighted. But it really did, the narrative... And we all love narrative then and now, was, right, they got beat earlier in the season, but now, look, they're growing, and Shearer was the difference maker. We were all right about that. We all said he's going to be the final piece of the jigsaw, and look what they've done at United. How do United recover from this? That was the other one. Is there any coming back from a defeat like this, a 5-0 defeat in a big match like this? And those questions were there to be answered. But at that point, Newcastle were flying. Ferdinand and Shearer, which I admitted last week I had my concerns about as a strike force. I wondered if they were maybe a little too similar to play together. Well, they're flying at this point together. We spoke about iconic strips. Newcastle win the iconic strip of the season award. United's, I don't think, has gone into fame, or Liverpool's, but that Newcastle kit with the little buttons and the white white collar, and the Newcastle Brown sponsorship. They did seem really, really together and exciting. And when your centre half is striding out of defence like Alan Hansen and then putting the ball into the net from 30
Weaker
yards
foot as well, I think.
Weaker foot, then it's very easy to get swept up in their names on it. This is their season mania. And I do remember St James's just looked like the most exciting stadium in the world to be in when it got like that. It still does, still can do at times, but that day it took on a new look. Like, is it manic is the description I'd have over it, because they couldn't believe what was happening. You know, like, they knew they were a good side and they were expecting, I'm sure, to beat United that day, but they weren't expecting to tan them 5-0. And coming off at the end, the United players look like, you know, they've just stepped off the plane from a war zone. There's a glassy eye look in their face, but then again, they know what they're just about to walk into in the dressing room better than anyone, I suppose.
There's a couple of things just tactically on that I think maybe speak to what we said earlier on just before we finish up, Martyn. There's the whole Shearer and Ferdinand thing. You watch some of those goals back, and the Ferdinand goal, Shearer's on the touchline, rampaging past Gary Neville, hitting the byline, swinging in an incredible ball, great header. Love those headers that hit everything before they go in. It's brilliant. And then Shearer
back across the way.
Then Shearer's goal as well, left hand side, left touchline. Ball goes across, Beardsley shoots, Ferdinand shoots, and then Shearer comes back in to finish it. So it wasn't just a 2-9s thing for them. It was a Shearer hitting the channels, Ferdinand dropping deep, which was really interesting. I'm still not entirely sure. I don't know if it's been explained. I didn't get a chance to check. I'm not entirely sure why Schmeichel is on the penalty spot when they're getting beat 4-0 to be chipped.
He did that.
Yeah, head's gone. It's all kind of ragged, but
it's the same with the goal against Croatia, that they're chasing the game at that point, and he did do that. He would wander out of his box at times.
Yeah, it's a superhero complex. A very interesting response, because United, as we will see next week, do not respond well to this defeat at all. Like a bad couple of results coming up, but neither.
Not as bad as Newcastle.
And there's something about people reaching their own psychological Everest and simply not being able to get the hunger to go back up again. And even later, John Beresford, who played that day, said, some people say, you know, I've got an FA Cup medal, I've got this or that. Well, I've got a video of us beating Manchester United 5-0. That's not right after the match. That is years later. And it probably just shows you just how emotionally impactful that is when we're still in October. Alan Shearer, very down to earth, says, look, we've embarrassed them today. They embarrassed us at Wembley, but no one's going to beat Manchester United 5-0 again. Whoever finishes above them will be champions. So John Hall, slightly less cautious. As was his wont, it must be said. You know what you've just seen today? You've just seen a performance from the champions. He wasn't wrong. Until next time, thank you, boys. Thank you, listeners. Bye for now.